Good morning, everyone who's joined already as well. I'm Jason from Minga here, and thanks for joining. And we just have a couple more minutes, and lots of folks still joining. So we'll give a couple minutes, and we'll dive right in. Since you are here early, and if you like, it would be wonderful. Always great to get a sense of like why people are joining. And with Tardies, we have so many conversations around, managing Tardies and everything else that comes with it. I would, if you can take a moment, we'll do it again in a second, but since you're on early, take a moment and throw it up in chat. We just opened up chat for everyone, and go ahead and, in a sentence, just maybe say like, what's the biggest challenge you have on campus with Tardies? How is it disruptive? What's the biggest management, issue with managing them, with operating your discipline frameworks? It can be whatever comes up to mind. It doesn't have to be anything super specific. It just has to be, just whatever comes up for you right away. And if you want, you can share more than one. Dave, thanks for jumping in right away. Catherine, thank you. John, Jason, Joy, thank you. Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, and parents making excuses. That's a good one. There's a little bit of personal feeling in that one. I can tell. That's Runner D. I'm not sure your name there. Sorry, it just comes with Runner D. But is there a Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts close to campus, or is it just stop-offs on the way? Yep. Oh, Dave Stubbs, that's a great question. Very good question. We're going to talk about that today, deciding whether to have teachers record tardies versus a tardy station. Really excellent question. Managing the quantity, Derek. Okay, we're rolling into time here. We have lots of people still joining, and that's okay. We will just continue to let people join. T. Weaver, how many free ones they should get? Well, none of them should be free, hopefully. But I guess that's a great question for how does that fit into a progressive consequence framework? And I think that's a really, really great question to explore. Jason Reese, you said bathroom visits, and if you have a sec just to elaborate on bathroom visits and how that comes into lates, is that like bathroom visits in the passing period, and then they're just taking too long? Or yeah, that'd be awesome to elaborate on that a bit, and we're gonna get started. So once again, good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Richards here with Minga. Today, we're going to talk about managing and reducing tardies. We're going to talk about it at a pretty high level. It's not going to just be managing and reducing tardies with Minga, although that is what's up here. But we're going to jump around and keep this a little bit of free flow today, because I think these are these are better discussions than webinars. And we also always have the opportunity here to learn from you. We spend a lot of time talking to high schools and middle schools, across the US about Tardies. Sometimes it's just, to be a listening ear and feel and share and empathize in the frustration of managing the volumes of Tardies that most schools are being challenged with today. And then sometimes, it's to start to talk about solutions and look at what we can do to, make a positive impact, and not just necessarily eliminate Tardies, because I think for most people, it's probably an unrealistic expectation to say we're going to shut Tardies down on campus. But we can, create start to reestablish and rebuild some systems and elements of accountability around, what being tardy is, and then also put some structure and some guidelines back in place that are always what I call the 3 C's. And we'll talk about the 3 C's and keep the 3 C's in mind as we go through this conversation today. But the 3 C's, when we start to talk about, policy, accountability, and structure on campus, we always come up with the 3 C's. Let me see if I have a slide here with the 3 C's. I bet you I do. Oh, there we go. I do. Share that one. Share that screen for a sec. So we talk about the 3 C's today, and we're going to talk a lot about this: clarity, consistency, and communication. So getting started today, let's start first with, I think, what's important to everyone right now, and I think is an important framework and understanding for you to have. That's the wrong one. And that is that almost every school that we talk to, and we talk to hundreds and hundreds of schools across the country, high schools and middle schools, almost every school we talk to, Tardies and the impact of Tardies on campus, not just period 1, but throughout the day, is one of, if not the biggest operational challenge that pretty much every school we talk to is struggling with right now. So the first thing that I love to start out with when we have these conversations is a little bit of a group hug that says, you're not alone in this. This is not a you problem. It's not a your school problem. It's not a your kids are extra out of control problem. Pretty much every school we talk to is struggling under an overwhelming volume of Tardies, and so much to the point that most people, when we talk to them, they don't even really know where to start. It's so overwhelming and the volumes are so high that it is, come to a little bit of a point of an insurmountable problem. Seems like an insurmountable problem right now. And, that analogy of being in the hole, right? And if you're in the hole and the hole's over your head, all you can see is the hole. You can't see anything outside of you. You're stuck in the hole and you just see the hole. And Tardies, I think, can feel like that right now. So the first thing is, for everybody to take a breath and have a sigh and understand that this is systemic a little bit at the moment. It is a culmination of a bunch of things. Obviously, we want to pin this sometimes just on COVID, but it's not just a COVID thing. I mean, we've got structure and discipline, has been changing, let's just say transitioning for a long time. And then COVID and most of our students being at home and having infinite flexibility around schedule and when they go to the bathroom and all that stuff didn't help. It certainly has made it a little more challenging, but most schools are struggling with this right now. So, don't feel like it's just a you problem. And so, from there, then we're gonna dive in and talk a little bit about getting into it today. And I already asked everyone that was on a couple minutes early. I asked them to throw into chat just a couple comment, a comment or two, a sentence or two about what is it about Tardies that comes up for you right away. That is, some of the biggest challenges that you're having, or the biggest challenge you're having, the biggest headache that it gives for you. And if you haven't had a chance to throw your a comment in chat, please go ahead and do so. There's lots of really great stuff in there already. Just, it doesn't have to be super well thought out, just whatever comes up for you right away. So as we go through tardies today, and we talk about a little bit about managing tardies, we're gonna break it up into 3 areas of managing tardies. The first one is functionally, how do you record tardies? That's the place to get started, is how do we record tardies? The second thing is, once we are recording tardies, how do we, or what do we create from a progressive discipline framework, and how do we implement and manage that progressive discipline framework, or the discipline framework at all? And there might even be a conversation that you're having in admin is, do we even do any type of discipline framework around tardies, and does it help? What is the impact, or what is the benefit, or what is the negative impact or consequence of, funny word, of a discipline framework around tardies? And are we just, creating a bunch of work that isn't making any difference anyways? So choosing how tardies are recorded, and then managing and operationalizing a discipline framework around tardies. And then, all of this, of course, rolls up into the over encompassing component, which is creating, defining, and communicating what your tardy policy is on campus, and ensuring that there is clarity, consistency, and is well communicated to everyone on campus. And since we're going to do this a little bit backwards, we're going to start with defining your tardy policy. I had someone come up here that said, T Weaver says, how many free ones should they get? And I'm assuming what you're asking there is, like, before we start implementing some type of discipline framework, how many tardies can they have in a period of time, before they start to get it? And that is something that's going to come from your tardy policy. But that'll be the 3rd or 4th thing we need to do in your tardy policy to get started. So we're going to dive into it. I really would love to keep this interactive. So please don't hesitate to throw stuff in chat if you have ideas. Sometimes these are extremely valuable collaborative efforts. When we hosted a webinar a while ago, we came up with some really great things, and we're going to share a couple today that came from the community, and it was awesome. So throw comments in as we're talking. It is a webinar framework, so unfortunately you can't speak unless we turn on your mic, but feel free to raise hand and stuff like that as well. So would love to keep it. So let's start with defining your tardy policy. And remember, when we define our tardy policy, remember the 3 C's: clarity, consistency, and well communicated. So we're going to start with the tardy policy. The first thing that we need with a tardy policy is not a progressive discipline framework. It is a very clear and well communicated definition around what a tardy is. So there's often, we see a ton of discipline frameworks that are set up by schools that are very pretty, and they're done super well in Canva, and they look great, and they're posted everywhere, but they're missing the simple definition of what a tardy is. And that is very important to start with, because to expect accountability, we need to first set a clear expectation. So there's no necessarily right or wrong definition to this, but just remember that when you define what a tardy is, and in this example here, a tardy is, basically anything after the bell rings. That's in this example tardy policy that we have right here, which is, the expectation for a student is that they are seated in class when the bell rings. Not strolling into class when the bell rings. The bell does not mean that that's an opportunity to start going to class. It means that when the bell rings, it's butts and seats. And if you are not butt and seat when the bell rings, then you're late. I see a lot, we see a lot of tardy policies that say, 5 minutes after the bell. And then it's a tardy. You're present if you're up to 5 minutes after the bell. You are, we've seen some 10s. And then if you're, up to 15 minutes is a tardy, and then after that is considered an absence. Whatever it is, excuse me, whatever it is, first and foremost, it is important that you're very clear with it. So come back to your tardy policy, see where it's documented somewhere, if it is documented somewhere on your website, or if your board defines it, or if it's defined at the district level. But come back and ideally for that note, it would be helpful if it's defined at the district level and it's consistent across campuses, because there is so much often student transition from one campus to another, or from the middle school to the high school. Having consistency there will be really valuable. That's another part of consistency. But let's just make sure first and foremost it's clear. So define what it is and make it very clear and set that expectation with everyone. And then of course, we'll get into a little bit of the consistency side around how we record tardies, but someone else posted in there as well. They said, getting teachers to consistently follow our framework, and that is very important too. So once you have clearly defined it, it must be consistently executed and leveraged and enforced on campus. But first and foremost, define what your tardy is. Secondly, define what happens when a student is late, and that will be integrated and tied in very closely to how tardies are recorded. But define what a student has to do if they're late. And that, we'll talk about that in a second, but there's a couple common options. And then third is define what are the consequences for being late. What are the consequences of a tardy? And you can use kind of two methodologies around consequence, are what's known as immediate consequences, which happen immediately right away, or progressive consequences, which is a sort of stepped series of consequences that typically get more severe the more late you are. And but whatever path you choose, our best practices tend towards a progressive consequence framework for a number of reasons. A lot of research around progressive consequence framework is very, I think, very supportive to a progressive consequence framework. But it is, this is human behavior, and it is also cultural components that depend on your campus and your student body and your staff body. So there is no specifically right answer, but there is a lot of really great research around progressive consequence frameworks. Define what they are and then how they are enforced. So that should all be included within your school tardy policy, your school truancy policy, and it should be well defined and then well communicated with your admin team, your staff, your students, and importantly, to the Dunkin' Donuts comments in here, to your families and your parents. You need to set these expectations, since many of our students today rely on their parents to get them to school on time. And so that can be, a very important part is ensuring that this is well communicated to parents at some point or another, and consistently communicated to parents at some point or another. So step number one, just a quick show of, is there a show of hands way? Is that the best way to do it? No, we're gonna keep running the comments. So just throw in the comments real quick. Just give me a yes, a no, or a in progress on your tardy. If you feel good about your tardy policy right now, just want to, just real quick, just yeses or nos or in progress, that you feel good about a tardy policy. As you can see, this is not a ton of work. It doesn't take a ton of time, but of course, the big part about it is getting buy-in. So I've got some no's, I've got some yeses. I like that. Oh, Joy Patton gave a yes with an exclamation mark. I like that, Joy. We're putting you on the spot. Maybe you can share a link, Joy, to your tardy policy on your website, or where you might have it defined that everyone can have a look at it, because I think that's also super helpful to share. So feel free in here to throw a link to your tardy policy in here that can be shared with everyone else. I'm going to share a bunch as well of examples that we have from some of our schools, but also just what we would call some districts and schools doing very great work around best practices on their tardy policy. So step numero uno is well-defined, very clear tardy policy. And I'll say it again, I'm going to say it a bunch more. Clarity, consistency, and well communicated. So once we have our tardy policy, a component of that and integrated in is going to be if a student is late, what happens? So what happens in the instance where a student is late? That is going to be tied into this, because in that case, this is going to be integrated directly with how do we record the tardy? How is that tardy recorded? And we have two options. Oh, look, there it is. Clarity, consistency, communication. Love it. So we have two options for recording tardies. Really, realistically speaking, two options for recording tardies. Option number one, probably the most common, and we're gonna throw this up in chat as well on which route you go. Option number one is going to be in class, so in the classroom by the teacher. So whenever a role is taken by the teacher and whenever they're doing attendance, they're going to mark students as absent if they're not there. And then when a student scrolls in late, they're going to update that attendance book at some point to a tardy. So that's what we're going to call classroom recording. Option number two, we're going to call centralized recording. And that means that when a student is late, let's say in my example of this, where butts in seats when the bell rings. So when the bell rings, you're expected to be in class, ready for instruction. In that case, once the bell rings, the door is closed, not necessarily locked. That doesn't need to be locked. It doesn't need to be a locked door policy, but closed door policy. And students will then check in at a central tardy station, either with a centralized location or with a, say, hallway monitor or CRO that's in the hallway and is set up to mark that student as tardy. Then they're going to be issued a tardy pass, which is what they'll use to show their teacher when they come into class, which is a confirmation that they were, in fact, already recorded as tardy somewhere. So real quick, throwing back up into chat, I would love to know at the moment how you're recording tardies. And so that's going to be classroom or central. Let's just throw those up as one option or the other, and let's see what everyone's saying here. Some benefits and some downsides to both. I got lots of classrooms coming up, classroom. Dave Stubbs, great question. Dave, can you just elaborate on that, throw that in? Is it too late, too long to get kids to class because it's too far to walk, or because checking them in and issuing them tardy passes is a horrifically slow process? So Dave, that'd be great if you could do that. Derek, you said central as well, so I'd love to hear, and Itzel Rodriguez, you said central. I'd love to know as a comment on those as well, on if it's too slow or if it's working well. So here's let's talk about in the class. A little bit in the class. So pros and cons of in the class. And once again, please continue to throw your pros and cons up in chat, but real quick pros and cons. So the pros of being done in the classroom are that it's distributed. So that means that all the teachers are just doing a handful of them instead of one or two people having to do all of them. So that can be done. It's also a pro can be that it is updated in the attendance book directly. So whatever you're using for attendance, probably your student information system, when it's being recorded in the class, it's going to be directly updated in the student information system. A third benefit to some degree is that because if it's done in the classroom, we know the student actually came to the classroom. And usually there's also a teacher that knows the student. So there's a visual verification and identification that's taking place in real time that it was actually that student that is checking in and coming in tardy. So those are the benefits of doing it in the classroom. It's also, I guess, a benefit, to be honest, is that it's mostly how it's always been done. And so from back when, when I was a kid, which was a long time ago, but, that's when it was still done, marked on paper. There was the check marks, and you would say here, and you'd get a little check mark beside your name. And, back in the days of negative attendance models, and as we've gone more to positive attendance models where you're just being marked if you're absent. But So that is a pro as well, is that, it's probably what's already happening for most schools. And so there's not a lot of training required. So what are the cons of classroom instruction? Well, the first big con is consistency. That is definitely the biggest issue with classroom recording, is that we are now distributing the framework, the foundation of our entire Tardy policy across however many teachers, 10 or 100 or 200 different teachers that you have on campus. And the moment we distribute that out to a bunch of people, where realistically speaking, this is not their job. This is not their job to, they didn't become a teacher to be a Tardy policy enforcement person. And it's not their role, necessarily speaking. Not why they want to be there, that's for sure. The moment we distribute it to everyone, we are going to have a consistency issue. It is not a, we may have it's not a if, it's a yes, we will have a consistency issue. That consistency issue is a very big issue, a very big concern for our Tardy policy on campus, because the moment we lose clarity, consistency, or the effective communication of our policy, it is no longer fair or realistic for us to have an expectation of student accountability. And that seems very harsh, but it is true. And it is true because, for any human at any stretch of the imagination, but for a teenager especially, it is very hard for them to have accountability to something that changes classroom to classroom. So that means that, if they come into one teacher's classroom and strolling in 5 minutes late is no big deal, and they can come in and they can sit down and it's a chatty classroom anyways, and they're not really disrupting anything, so it's totally fine, then that's great. That is where they'll kind of set their expectation and do it that way. But then in the next classroom with that teacher, if you're 1 minute late, you're in trouble, and it's marked as a tardy, and maybe even some classroom enforcement discipline is being done and taking place there. Well, those two very contrasting sets of expectations are going to fundamentally break down the student's accountability framework. And Dave Stubbs is saying, is alluding to the same thing right now too, which is that we have a consistency with teachers not closing the door when the tardy, so he's also having a consistency issue with Centralize. So of course, the other cons that come along with this is in the classroom is that it's very disruptive to classroom workflow. And so, it's going to create obviously, as we're continuing to be in a realm where teacher retention is a big concern, that disruption to the classroom and that frustration in the classroom also has a big negative impact. And lastly, it is disruptive to our other students. So we are having Tardies then are having a negative impact on instruction time for everybody in that classroom. And every time there's a big disruption, when the teacher has to go back and somehow update that student as tardy, it is disrupting everyone else's and having a negative impact on everyone else's learning experience. So we're not just taking away from that student's instruction time, we're taking away from every student's instruction time. And it's realistically probably shortening our classroom instruction time by 20 to 30% right now, just marking tardies in the classroom. So Centralized, and we'll talk a little bit about this, and Dave, that's a great part that we'll dive into. Centralized means that we're, the pros of centralization are that we can drive consistency because we can centralize how tardies are done to a handful of places. We still have to manage that consistency with what Dave is alluding to there, which probably, Dave, in combination with this, it might be helpful to have a couple hallway monitors that are also ensuring that students, you're doing tardy sweeps as well as central tardy stations, especially when you're starting to drive and enforce that policy at the beginning of the year, is to ensure that, the doors are getting closed, and then teachers are, or students are getting centrally checked in as tardies, and then they're just showing that teacher a tardy pass to get into class. And consistency is very important still there, but we'll talk about that as a pro. There's a another pro, obviously directly related to that con on the classroom side, is that if they have a pass and it's very easy for them to come into class and they can do it, quietly, then it's also a lot less disruptive to teacher instruction time and to the instruction time for other students in the classroom. So in that case, teachers can basically take attendance right when the bell rings, right after the bell rings. And at that point, then they can begin instruction time and continue instruction time, even if students are quietly coming in, showing their tardy pass and coming in, late after that. The cons of this are, it's a different type, there's different training often involved. So it is a little bit of training, and part of that training is driving the consistency. As Dave Stubbs said here, when the bell rings, the door closes. And here's a little tip that we came up doing a bunch of research, and we've got a bunch of links to this research and resources. A very good combination of doing central recording is actually how you, or the teacher process for how the door is closed. And so here is an example of something that is very constructive and very helpful, is that during the passing period, for the last, say, 1 to 2 minutes of the passing period, and 2 minutes is probably great if you've got a 5-minute passing period, for the last 2 minutes, the first thing you can do, and this came from a tip from the community, and this was loved by everyone on one of our webinars, is put some music on your PA. So some nice music, some good music, but the music is an indicator that you should be moving to class. So that's a nice reminder instead of a bell and a pre-bell. Bells are where students are kind of tuned out to ignore the bells. So music is a reminder to move to class. In combination, when the music comes off, the teacher comes to the door. So now the teacher's coming to the door as students are moving to class. And this is a very, very interesting and supportive step to this process, is that when the teacher comes to the door, they're greeting students that are on time. And this is a very strong positive enforcement because it's individualized and it's personalized. So the teachers are greeting students as they come in the door, hi, Jason, nice to see you, come on in. And that is a very positive reinforcement for students that are showing up on time. Students, everybody likes to be greeted and personalized. And so it also puts the teacher at the door so that when the bell rings, they're there to close the door. And that can be, and Dave, I don't know if you've tried that, but that can be a helpful way of driving that policy, and also integrates a very positive reinforcement when they're coming into class. So, as part of our policy framework, we have to pick this is how our tardies recorded, and you've got to dive into one of these two. We've got lots of different people. It looks like most people were doing classroom, but there was some central here. So Dave is saying checking them in and issuing tardy passes is taking too long. So that is another con of Centralize, is that it needs to be an efficient process. Most schools, when we're talking to, are handwriting tardy passes. Of course, that is not going to scale. And certainly not going to scale for period 1 when students are coming into school late, in addition to class late. But it's not going to scale for any period. So we've got to get to an automated process where passes are going to be created automatically. At Minga, we go full digital. So a written pass or a printed pass is a backup option at best. Generally speaking, not scalable. And we do go full digital. So that would mean that students would check in, often with a digital ID, or they could check in with their regular ID, and then their tardy pass would be sent directly to their phone. It's a real-time pass that they would show to their teacher when they came in the door. And that way, no passes need to be printed or even worse, handwritten. So, but that can be a slow process if you're doing it manually. And then the third part of Centralized that is important, it comes at the very end of the process, but it is that we need to reconcile those tardies with our attendance book. So if teachers are marking students absent in class, then we need to ensure that students that checked in tardy, that A is converted to a T at some point. And that at some point means that at a point before your all-call system calls home and says they were absent. So there needs to be some coordination and alignment with your attendance system on campus. And there's a little more to that than we'll have time to get into, but we've lots of documentation around kind of, things that you need to think about through that process. So our best practices are often centralized. So if you go through our best practices documentation, it will talk about centralized tardy check-in, because that clarity and more importantly, that consistency is so important. But that might be a big step for you. So everything that we'll talk about today, to a degree, can be done from classroom recording as well. A little bit of a different processes. But yeah, moving to some type of centralized recording. There are a couple other bumps in the road for that process, but if you can get that process working on campus, it is where even most kind of research around this is leaning towards being the most effective. So. Okay, so let's see, continuing on. So once we have defined our tardy policy and we have our determined how we're going to record our tardies, the next is implementing our tardy discipline framework. So we're going to add an R word into the 3 C's. So we still need clarity, consistency, and well communicated. But now we need to add realistic. And this is probably the first comment or opportunity for discussion on nearly every, and I've got a bunch of other ones here. Let's see here. Share this one again. There we go. So probably the first framework with the volumes of tardies that we're seeing at schools right now, when they are consistently tracked and recorded, the volumes of tardies, your discipline framework needs to be realistic. If it jumps from 0 to lunch detention, and you get a tardy for every, or you get a lunch detention for every tardy that you get, in a semester, you're going to have students with 50 lunch detentions, and it's, you're going to have to decide on if that is the battle you want to play instead. And I'm not saying it should be, there should be lots of free tardies, but at the same time, it needs to be realistic with where we're at, and starting out with something, or at least maybe even starting step 1 with getting accurate data around recording and what tardies actually are, so that you can make a data-driven decision, into your tardy policy and update your tardy policy, could be very important. Because if you create something right out of the gate that is, for all intents and purposes, unenforceable, then your tardy policy is I guess to put it in a cliche, is not worth the paper it's written on, because an unenforced tardy policy is arguably worse than no tardy policy, because now students aren't taking it seriously either. So most tardy policies that we run into today, that we see when we start this process, are, realistically speaking, unrealistic. They're just not realistic. They are way out of control, and there's so much discipline being applied that now we have a huge challenge in enforcing the discipline. It's bordering on unenforceable. It's so big. So it might be very beneficial to you to, if you have the opportunity, first start with making data-driven decisions, and let's see what our tardy situation is once we start doing accurate recording. And then secondly is putting something in place that is progressive and is functional, and it still makes admin and staff have a sense of enforcement, that something's being done about this process, but that it's not going to overwhelm the school with and your team with a whole bunch of discipline enforcement. So often we'll see kind of like, this is a great example right down here. These are just schools. If you just Google high school tardy policy and then click under images under your Google search, you'll find hundreds of these, hundreds. And so there's a great place to look at what other schools are doing. If you go back to the regular search, you can probably go to their links on their websites for their tardy policy. So it's a great place to get into all sorts of content there. But start with something. Our best practices are going to start with something into start with warnings. So there's no free ones. There's no free tardies. Start with warnings. Those warnings can be, to the student, and then a next level warning will be to the parent. You can incorporate warnings to parents and students simultaneously as well. So if you are getting a sense that students are often late because their parents are stopping off at Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks on the way to school, well, start notifying their parent every time that the student's tardy. And that's going to help drive some awareness and reminders back to the parent. One of the really great parts of Minga that we can do is we can integrate SMS-based notifications to parents at the behavior level. So every single time a tardy gets recorded, the parents can get a text message. And when they get if it gets progressed to, let's say, after the 5th tardy, they get an official warning or a disciplinary warning, which means that, on the next tardy, you're going to get a lunch detention or a intervention. Those notifications can be sent to parents as well. So start realistic. We'd say, certainly a few warnings is a great place to start. Bring some awareness to the fact that your tardy policy is being enforced. And that can be in the 1 to 5 range. After that, you can start with a first level of progressive discipline, which in our best practices is going to be an intervention. So it'll be like a lunch detention with a tardy intervention, which means they'll fill out like a tardy worksheet that'll help them through a little bit of, self-reflection. We call it tardy reflection on why they're tardy, and bring some awareness to processes that might help them not be tardy, but also identify the other people around them that are contributing to them being tardy. But start something, warnings, and then to lunch detentions or a small intervention. And then as you get up into the 10 to 15 tardy range, which unfortunately today is not uncommon. It's going to be very common to have a large number of your students that have that many tardies. Then you can start to look at after schools, or even parent meetings and mandatory parent meetings and stuff like that as well. So implement a realistic and enforceable tardy policy. And between those three things, there is a lot of really, really great research. And I'm gonna close with this and then talk a little bit about how this can all piece together with Minga. But there's a lot of really great research and a lot of conversations, because this is so overwhelming right now that is it even worth it to do a discipline framework of any type, shape, or form? And our belief in our best practices and a lot of research is that it definitely is a tardy policy and progressive discipline. It is very important to understand is not just about fixing the problem. Many of these problems of students being consistently, especially if it's consistently late, habitually late, are not necessarily solvable by you. It is likely something that is outside of the control, and the progressive, discipline framework is not necessarily going to fix that. It is going to fix and encourage students to be on time in lots of cases, but for students where it's out of the control, you can't. A progressive discipline and a discipline framework in general is about creating a structure that protects the integrity of your institution, of the school. It is about showing that you care about a teacher's time, that you care about instruction, and that is important to you and a fundamental element of your institution. And the progressive discipline, a discipline framework, is meant to protect that. First and foremost, not just to fix the problem of tardies. In many cases, that is not fixable by you, and letting go of the need to fix that will be a very important part of you being able to properly implement a tardy policy on campus. And we have links to some very well-written papers around human psychology and why discipline in that sense is about, your institution is about respect and is about the integrity of your institution, not about just fixing tardies. So the answer to the question of like, are tardy policies is discipline going to fix this? The answer is no, it's not. Discipline is not going to fix our tardy problem. It is going to help it, and it's going to reduce, clarity, consistency, and well communicated and then enforced and operationalized is going to help your tardies policy, but it's not going to fix it. And yes, I do, Michelle. I'll link some resources back here on that. But that is very important, and a very important thing to share. I can share this one again. Very important one, and I think there are a couple of resources in this managing and reducing tardies in Minga as well in this worksheet that right down here, there's some links to some of that research. And so, yeah, really, really important part of that. And of course, very important to have the rest of your team, your staff and your students, and even parents understand that is part of why the progressive discipline framework is there. And letting go of having to fix it, because then it won't feel insurmountable when you're enforcing policies and running policies and they don't seem to be making a difference, or not the difference you were hoping for. So so back to our 3 steps, and I'm going to kind of wrap this up and have a few minutes for questions here, but and talk a little bit about how this integrates and implements into Minga. Your 3 steps on improving tardies. So step number 1, clarity. Create a well-defined tardy policy. Start with what is a tardy and finish with a framework around discipline around the enforcement of that policy. So start with a tardy policy. Step number 2 is implement and choose how you're going to record tardies and review that and discuss that and make sure you have clarity and consistency with your staff on campus. And step number 3 is going to be the implementation of that discipline and consequence framework, and then the enforcement of it. So at Minga, this and I haven't really introduced Minga, but I'm sure most of you know a little bit about, if you're here, what we do. We call Minga is a campus management platform. We focus on 4 main areas of your campus. Safety and security first, with things like identification and hallway management and check-in functionality, operationalization, which is like day attendance and things like this around tardies, implementing and operationalizing tardy frameworks, student behavior and behavioral management, as well as engagement and community management. So the value component and what Minga brings to the table in this sense is, operationally, we provide the framework and the guidance and the structure around how all this is done. And then we also provide the tools to implement it. So from high efficiency, high performance check-in, so the ability to quickly, check students in that are tardy, say through that central process. But then if you look into our behavioral components as well, I'm gonna update that. And look into our behavioral components, we can not only give you the opportunity to, at scale, record tardies and either in the classroom or outside of it centrally, which is our best practices, but also to manage your entire consequence framework and then completely automate the operationalization and the implementation of that consequence framework. So after 3 tardies, send mom a warning. After 5 tardies, automatically assign a lunch detention, and all the notifications that happen within that to the student, to staff, to admin, and to parents. And then manage when students serve those consequences and continue to drive accountability around that on campus and with all those notifications as well. But then also into creating it from a community perspective so that it's very easy for you to consistently and reliably communicate your clear and consistent tardy policies and other discipline policies, but also the incentive side of behavior as well. So looking at incentives, points, rewards, around, maybe one option on talking about positive is we look at, incenting students to be on time. So if you check in on campus early in the morning, or if you're on campus early and you're on time to period one class, rather than just having discipline, we also issue some incentive or a point. And so that's a little bit about Minga. I have a few minutes for some Q&A, and I don't even know where that went. There's some answered questions. You can learn more from us. You can go to our website at www.minga.io. And if you would like to continue this conversation, then just sign up there for a demo, and we will have some time to talk this over one-on-one. We'd love to do it. We can share everything that we learned talking to, hundreds, I guess thousands, probably at this stage, thousands of schools around things just like this. But we also have a huge opportunity to learn from you. That music playing in which is a favorite now and integrated as part of our best practices, came from a school that they started putting music on, and they actually noticed that playing music 2 minutes before as part of their closed door policy had a very, very positive impact on reminding everyone that when the music comes on, it's time to start going to class. So I really appreciate all your time today. We will have a recording of this. And we have tons of resources available. So if you go to our website, most of those resources are available, but we'll also be sending some links to resources out to everyone that was part of the call today. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to throw them up. I think that some people are posting them here, but really appreciate all your time this morning. And I hope you all had a wonderful long weekend. And I'm Jason here from Minga, and thank you so much for joining.